First on tonight's agenda, dates and venues have been confirmed for Start of Origin 2020. Game 1 will be played in Adelaide, November 4. Game 2 at ANZ Stadium, November 11. And Game 3 at Suncorp Stadium on November 18. State of Origin is going to be in Melbourne Cup month. Is it going to work?
It's an interesting one. I think it's a real... See, Ben, when we used to have the old kangaroo tours and it used to take place after the last game, they go to England for 3 months, there always used to be half the competition who would finish final, like playing at the end of the regular season, would have to spend a month trying to stay fit. But when you went away on a kangaroo tour, you give them a couple of club games, play them into form. It's going to be very difficult for players. For example, Tom Trbojevic, who's coming back from Manly, who will try and make an Origin team based on 2 games in the past, what, 2 months? Yeah. 3 months, and try and be fit, and then he's got to stay fit over the final series where Manly won't be a part of it. That's going to be the trick, given particularly how much so many of the injuries this season have been put down to the fact that they didn't have a proper off-season after the COVID break and the players came in cold.
I think they'll be fine. I mean, the professional athletes these days, you know, even the guys who don't play finals footy, they're going to have a couple of weeks out of the bubble, then they're going to have to go back into the bubble, guys like Daly Cherry Evans, but... I mean, they'll keep themselves in good nick. I think the footy will be fine. I think the bigger issue for me is they're not going to be out in the community selling the game. That's going to be a problem. You know, in Adelaide, they're probably going to fly in and fly out the day of the game. So they're not going to be out in the community generating a buzz about the game in the cities they're actually in. I wonder whether the game's going to have the same... The game's going to have the same hype about them this year.
You say they're professional athletes, which they are, but they're also human beings. And this year, they've lived the life in a bubble.
It's been a long
away
season,
from their families. Look, these young guys, they're not monks. And they're almost living the life of a monk.
Well, it's a mental...
And mentally, imagine the challenge of then, after what they've been through all year, trying to pick them up for another 5-week campaign.
I've got no doubt, to sort of go against your point, that Game 3 is going to be much better than Game 1.
So they'll come into the first game, many of them, not having had the match fitness that they normally get when Origin is in the middle of the season.
The other part too is that when we used to pick the old kangaroo tours, there was always a bias towards players. If they were on the fringe and they weren't incumbents, there was a bias towards players who played deep into the finals.
Yes.
And I dare say that I think Kevin Walters and Brad Fittler will do similar. They're picking 27-man squads who'll go into the bubble for the entire 3 games. But I think there will be a bias towards players from the Panthers, the Storm, the Roosters, Raiders and the Eels, who I expect to go deep into the finals.
Reedy, the crowds, what's the situation with crowds across the 3 games?
Well, I think they're optimistic they'll get 20-odd thousand, 50% capacity in Adelaide, which is about 25 or so, 26. I think the same in Queensland, 20, 25 or so. New South Wales, the interesting one. I think they're hoping to get 50% at ANZ Stadium, but... you know, obviously they've got to convince the government to get that across the line. I mean, that's an issue for the grand final as well, whether they convince the government to throw the gates open for the grand final down here. But I think they're hopeful they'll have some luck there and get at least, what's ANZ hold, 70? 35.
So that's the mix we're worried about, right, is that you've got players who are potentially a little tired, which produce a product that is down on intensity, because that's what Origin is famous for, in front of half-filled stadiums. So rugby league...
Ben, we don't know what we're going to get. No, like... It could damage the product.
It's a tough one, though, when you think about it, because the NRL were faced with the situation where when we went through the lockdown and they redid the draw and they made the decision to make Origin at the end of the season, at that stage we worried if we were going to get through the full season. Well, so they had no choice, really. We had to try and knock that season over while we could. We've got through it now. In hindsight, you can look back and think, would have been nice to have Origin in the middle still, but at the time, they had no option.
No, it was, there's no... I got no problem with the planning of it. They had to do that because they had to try and get as many games in the bank as we could in case there was another outbreak and the competition had to be suspended again.
Now, you say we don't know what we're going to get. Then why did Phil Rothfield sit here last night and say he knows exactly what's going to happen, which is a 3-0 sweep to New South Wales?
Please.
Are you asking me to explain, Buzz?
Ben, this is when we're at our best, backs to the wall, Queensland. This is when we're at our best. We love it.
Jack Gibson.
Just write us off, please.
Jack Gibson, who was a famous SP bookie and also did a bit of coaching at the time, Always said the best bet you can make is Queensland when they're underdogs.
Yep.
You just go through the history of the game. Queensland is underdogs. If you back that game every time, you're well out in front.
Crawls, have you had a cursory glance at what the squads might be in November and who you like? And I mean, are New South Wales clearly coming off the last 2 years still deserved favourites, or do you think Queensland have unearthed a couple of handy young forwards this year that might...
New South Wales are definitely the favourites in this. Look at the form of the Queensland teams this year, sitting down the bottom of the table. We won't have one Queensland side apart from Melbourne's Queensland Storm in the finals. So there's no doubt in the world New South Wales would start the favourites. But I really believe too, a lot of it's going to come down to the coaching and the ability of Kevy and Freddie to get the best out of their squads on the back of what I was saying earlier with all these COVID restrictions, to try and make it as fun as possible and get the levels of intensity up. That's what will win the series.
I tell you what gives me faith, Ben, that Queensland spine. Ponga, Munster, Cherry Evans, Jake Friend or Harry Grant. I mean, to me, that's a...
You've knocked Ben Hunt out. He won't be the 9.
On the bench, maybe.
OK.
Yeah, well, him or Harry, maybe, on the bench, I suppose. But I think it's a good spine. I think it's good enough spine to give New South Wales a red-hot go. And they've just got to hope they don't pick up any injuries, Queensland, because we just don't have the same depth as New South Wales. I mean, 27 players, it's going to be stretching Queensland's resources.
A few have emerged though this year for Queensland.
Yeah.
That's the big thing.
Big Tino and Harry and some good players.
All right, let's head up to Brisbane now, where the Courier Mail's Peter Bedell is standing by. Peter, thanks for joining us. Now, with respect to the Queensland and the Broncos coaching roles, is it as simple as Kevy Walters and Paul Green being the only options for both jobs?
Yeah, it could seem that way, couldn't it, Ben? That might be I guess, the most logical solution. I can tell you, Ben, just tonight I spoke to a few people at the Broncos, and they will kick off the interview process later this week for the Broncos coaching post next season. Now, I'm told that Paul Green and Kevin Walters, obviously we know they're the front runners. They will be granted interviews. They've had 10 applicants at this stage for the job. I'm told 5 of those will be jettisoned. We'll have a short list of 4 or 5. Kevy and Greeny will be among those 5. Now, the ramifications, Ben, it becomes a bit of a coaching merry-go-round, doesn't it? If Kevy gets the job with the Broncos, that opens the door for Paul Green as the Maroons coach. If Paul Green gets the job with the Broncos, then Kevy stays where he is at the Maroons. But, of course, there is Wayne Bennett lingering in the background. He's been sounded out as a possible Plan B contingency for the Maroons. But we'll know in the next 4 to 5 days, Ben, I think we'll have some more clarity around the Broncos position. And when that's sorted, then we'll know something about the Queensland Origin position in the coming months.
So you